And to councillors, thank you for having this back-to-back meeting. It's been a long day, but this is an important subject for us all. Welcome to the public, and reminder that I don't think we'll need to take a break. We'll go right through at this stage, but phones off please, because you may have used them in the lunch break. Thank you. So could I ask Councillor Donaldson to open our council meeting, please?
E no e tātou. E te atua ka harawa, ko koe te tohu rangatira, te tohu mātauranga. Mana kitia mai mātou, wau pononga I tēnei wā, e mahi nei I a mātou mahi, mō te painga o ngā tangata o te kaunihira o ngā roto o Rotorua. Takua mai kia tau te rangi marie ki runga I a mātou I ngā wā katoa. Ko ihu karaiti, hoki tō mātou ariki. Āmeni.
Thank you. And we have no apologies and no councillors zooming in for this meeting.
Excuse me, Your Worship. I do have a dentist appointment, so I'll have to leave about 2:20 past 2. Thank you.
Thank you for the notice. Are there any declarations of interest? There appear to be none. Are there any urgent items not on the agenda? There appear to be none. Staff reports, recommendation 1. I'll wait till... Oh, you've got it up there. Well done, Commander. Permanent alcohol ban for Rotorua Community Youth Centre Reserve, Marist St Michael's Sports Park Reserve, Shambles Theatre Reserve, and lots 2, 3, 4, 5, DPS 65170 commence consultation. Do I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report? Thank you. Moved Councillor Yates, seconded Councillor Donaldson. Right, that the report, Permanent Alcohol Ban for Rotorua Community Centre, I've said, yeah, I'll take that as read. All those in favour? Contrary? Carried. Greg's there in the chair to overview the report.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good afternoon. Council currently has an active alcohol ban bylaw. This bylaw currently lists around about 46 areas that are permanently banned from alcohol within our district. Schedule 6 of the bylaw provides for temporary ban areas to be instated by Council. Back in February 2021, Council used that to instate a temporary ban on certain areas within our district. That lapsed 12 months later and was reinstated again. That is due to lapse at the end of February next year. So I have a little presentation just to give a bit of context. Looking at the CBD, all the red areas that we have there are alcohol ban areas. The highlighted green circle is where we're talking about today. So we've got 4 different sections that have been under temporary ban. The one is the Rotorua Community Youth Centre Reserve, the Marist St Michael's Sports Park Reserve, and Shambles Theatre Reserve, and then the council lots in between. What we are seeking for approval today is to go out for public consultation on these areas to make them permanent. So this will be done through a special consultative procedure, and we are hoping to go out for consultation from the 12th of September this year to the 17th of October. That will be followed by verbal submissions and then brought back to Council in a decision-making report, deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg. So we open now for any questions. Councillor Rotorua.
Thank you. If the land use changes, so what happens if the land use changes that you've identified there, those areas? Will the alcohol ban still remain, or is it just applicable for those certain areas and the activities that are currently undertaken therein or thereon?
Yeah, so currently they are for those reserves. I would probably have to ask somebody else in the planning section to identify that. But if, for example, those areas had to change to another use outside of that, Council has the opportunity to go and ask us to go out for consultation again and revoke those permanent ban areas as well.
Thank you. Councillor Yates, then Councillor McPherson and Donaldson. No? Councillor McPherson?
Thank you, Chair, through you. On page 7, you refer to the police data on alcohol-related incidents. Does the data show that the temporary ban was effective?
In certain ways it does. That data has been quite difficult to check. Obviously with changing times, things have changed on our base data as we started, so we're comparing data to temporary ban area data, so we've had to go back to prior to our temporary ban being instated, and we do have support for that, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Donaldson?
Thank you, Worship. Just to signal that I'm happy to move part 2 of the recommendation, but also in answer to Councillor Rotorua Lakes. From my recollection of my former career, an alcohol ban can only apply to a public space. So if the land use changed it to a private use, it can't have an alcohol ban on it.
Correct.
So moved Councillor Donaldson and seconded Councillor Wang. Any discussion? There appears to be none. So I'm going to put the motion that Council resolves to commence public consultation on making the temporary alcohol ban, I don't know why it's in brackets, for Rotorua Community Youth Centre Reserve, Maris St Michael's Sports Park Reserve, Shambles Theatre Reserve and lots 2, 3, 4, 5 DPS 65170 that sit adjacent to these reserves permanent. All those in favour? Contrary? Carried. Thank you. We move now to recommendation 2, housing for everyone. Plan change 9, approval for notification. I ask for a mover and a seconder to receive the report, that the report proposed housing for everyone plan change PC 9 provisions, section 32 report and the draft design guide for residential intensification be received. Moved Councillor Rotorua Lakes. Councillor Kaifong. All right, sorry. All right, thank you. Right, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried. Right, JP, you're going to overview this and you've got Damon beside you.
Good afternoon, councillors. It's with considerable pleasure to be here today, and I think I'd very much like to just acknowledge the policy team who have done this work. So obviously Damon beside me and Simon Thurston, but there's also Kim up the back there, and unfortunately because of COVID, the last member of the team, Anna, is not available today. She's in isolation. And also you've come across through various workshops, Barkers and Associates, who we engaged to assist us with what was an extremely short timetable to produce a plan change for you. So I'd really like to acknowledge the team and our external consultants for the excellent work they have done in preparing this plan and undertaking the engagement required to get it to this point. So on that basis, I will hand across to Damon and Simon just to take you through some slides that summarise the key elements of this plan change. They're slides that you have seen many times before, and for those of you who have been involved in some of the public engagement exercises, the community has seen many times as well. So again, it's just for clarity to say these are the key changes and key elements of this plan change, and then probably conclude with some of the implications around qualifying matters and the timetable. So I'll hand across to Damon and Simon now.
We don't have to do it in Zoom. So many of the planning team have been at home Zooming on this very intensive piece of work. Thanks, Damon.
Yes, thanks. It's great to be here in person, and afternoon, everyone. If we just move to the next slide. There it is there. Okay. Yeah, essentially, just in terms of the structure of the presentation, want to keep it fairly light. Obviously needs to be considered in conjunction with the more detailed report that we provided. But essentially just a very brief overview of context. We're pretty familiar with the context, but it's useful just to touch on those points because it frames the rationale for the plan change. We'll also touch briefly on engagement. And then I suppose the key themes is how we enable medium density and also high density. And this is the major shift from our existing district plan. So it's essentially the foundation for a more fit for purpose district plan. So those are kind of key components of this presentation. And then we'll talk about just the overall outcome that we want to deliver through this tool. And then we'll then get into the qualifying matters component, which is essentially the constraining factors to development. And then also the additional supporting changes, very briefly, that have been introduced to support our new framework going forward. And then process and next steps. So just very briefly, in terms of growth context, we're very familiar with that, but essentially that top left picture shows you that, we've had a period of flat growth for a long period of time, and over the recent decade we've seen sustained growth and increasing growth. So that means from a district plan perspective that our current district operative plan is not fit for purpose. We need a plan that is accommodating a growing and changing environment. We also just, that square on your right-hand side that talks about the quantum of homes, essentially is a product of our capacity assessment that we did, that we took to council, saying that we do need to deliver against the quantum of homes by 2050, which is close to 10,000. And we know that we're also trying to address in the short term a significant deficit. I think also it's important to bear in mind that not only are we growing, we're also changing as a district in terms of certainly the household structure. So we know that over time the demand for 1 to 2 bedroom homes will only increase because the proportion of aging population is increasing over time. And I think lastly, just to mention, access to homes is very critical. So obviously that brings the question of affordability in, to say, look, we need to provide more affordable options, and to an extent the smaller homes provide that more affordable housing types over time. And I think critically in the context of this plan change is the legislative context. And also, these issues are not unique to Rotorua. I think it's issues that prevail across New Zealand. So the legislation has pushed us into obviously moving, as JP was saying, at speed to deliver a notified plan change by August, which is essentially this month on the 20th. So firstly, starting with the national policy on urban development, and that's effectively saying we need a well-functioning district. We can't just ad hocly support growth. We need to ensure that high density needs to happen in those places with highest, which would support that high density, and those most accessible places. And we've done that analysis to determine which those places are. I think obviously more recently this year, the RMA Amendment Act came into effect, and that was essentially saying we need to get on with the job of creating an environment where we can increase housing supply in a more proactive way. And that was through introducing the medium density residential standards. But before I get into the plan change proper, I guess it's important to note that we've had pretty robust and extensive engagement to ensure that, I suppose, A, everyone comes along the journey with us, and B, provide the opportunity in the pre-engagement phase, if you like, before notification, for people to have their say, and obviously to provide perspectives on how we should provide this change. The plan change itself, before I get into the medium density residential standards, is really a plan change around intensification, and that was signalled by the NPSUD before this bill, saying that effectively we need a plan change as council by August of this year. So the medium density residential standards was introduced a bit later to say, look, we need to introduce some mandatory provisions to ensure that certainly for dwellings up to 3 stories and up to 3 dwellings per site needs to happen as a matter of right, so without the need for a resource consent. So essentially people could proceed straight to building consent phase for those package of provisions. And that's essentially what they are there. I'm not going to go into detail about that. and this is pretty significant in terms of us as council, because all that area in yellow and effectively that dark orange area essentially is immediately upzoned, if you like, from August to a medium density environment. Currently, the yellow area supports low density. Bearing in mind that that orange area there, which more or less covers our current residential 2 zone, will get even further, will be able to be upzoned even further when the plan change becomes operative, because that would be the new high density zone, and I'll touch on that a little bit later. So a significant shift by adopting these medium density residential standards for our landscape from a housing perspective for this district. As I mentioned, quite importantly, this plan change provided the opportunity, through giving effect to the National Policy Statement of Urban Development, to enable higher density and mixed use within those areas that would support that. So you can see down the bottom of the picture, the pinky purple is our Fenton Street corridor, which we are enabling for more residential outcomes, so greater heights. Also, the Central Mall area are providing for residential development above the existing commercial footprint. And certainly within our CBD, which is the purple area in the northern end, providing greater height for apartment living. And then the orange area to your left is essentially the high density residential zone, which is new and we're proposing. And that more or less covers our former residential 2 zone, which supported more medium density outcomes. So the difference between that orange area, essentially shown there in the picture, is that it allows for height up to 19.5 meters, which is essentially allowing for apartment type developments up to potentially 5/6 stories. So that's, I suppose, a significant jump from the MDRS. But I think the diagram on my right, which shows that accessibility heat map, shows that we've been we carefully considered where high density should be located, and that's essentially slap bang in the middle of those areas with greatest access. And that's access with respect to walking, cycling and transport, but also access to our schools, open space and services. I think just importantly, before, just to recap and to conclude, I guess, on the outcome side, is essentially we sit with a district plan with a more fit for purpose urban framework for our zoning, which ultimately delivers good urban form for a growing district. And essentially by that yellow area allows for density up to 2 to 3 stories, as I mentioned, because that yellow area relates to the MDRS. So that ensures that we are able to deliver duplexes and 3-story walk-ups and provides more choice for people across suburbs. But equally, that orange area that you can see in the middle there allows for apartment type development. Formerly, that was enabled in our CBD. It's now enabled in the residential area, which is pretty close to our central part of the city. So it allows more options for terrace type homes and apartments. And then equally, as I've mentioned, our suburban centres, as well as our city centre, has now also been more enabled for mixed use development. So that's residential development above our shops, effectively. Which I think does 2 things. One, it provides for that diversity and choice in terms of homes and creating more options in the housing front, but also allows for a more vibrant CBD and more vibrant commercial centres, because obviously the more customers and people you have in close proximity to the commercial space, the more vibrant your outcomes are. I think it's important to mention as well, in terms of the design side of things, we have obviously got design guides that support this kind of development. So firstly, there's a national design guide which should be looked at in conjunction with the medium density residential standards, and that encourages good design for dwellings up to 3 stories. But we've also introduced a Rotorua Intensification design guide, which is essentially a best practice tool. It sits alongside the plan for your more comprehensive type of developments, so 4 or more dwellings. So that covers, I suppose, the landscape of housing typologies that we'd expect to see delivered through both the MDRS and the rest of the plan change. And it's important to note that a design guide is a living document. So it's something that we'll obviously be taking through our next round of consultation with the development community, because obviously design, first of all, is subjective, but also I think it's important that the community is fully on board with the type of, I suppose, outcomes we want to deliver as a city. But the design guide is critical in terms of providing the level of certainty for those discussions with developers, both from our consenting team side, but also the developers themselves in terms of what good practice is. So essentially, that effectively covers, I suppose, the outcomes of this plan change. Simon's going to take us through the qualifying matters and the other supporting components to this plan change to round out essentially the presentation.
Yeah, thanks Damon, and thanks everyone. So as Damon and JP alluded to, obviously we have to apply those MDRS, those medium density standards, to our Res 1 and our Res 2 zones. It does give us the ability to I guess, to state at this stage where it's not appropriate for those standards to be applied, and those, I guess, what they're calling in the legislation is qualifying matters, or as JP has put it, disqualifying matters. So where are the MDRS standards not appropriate? And we've considered things, our existing constraints, such as the national grid, natural hazards, our SNAs, our ONFLs, and our current designations. It's also through this process it's given us the ability to consider new qualifying matters, and in this case, for us, it's the flooding that we've considered. Our cultural villages, so our residential 3 zone, which is our Ohini Mutu, Whakarewarewa and Ngāpuna, and also our historic heritage, and basically consider what is the suitable level of development in and around these historic buildings that we currently have scheduled in the plan. So, this is a brief snapshot of the areas that have essentially been carved out, and so these won't have. So the areas shown in red won't have legal effect of MDRS come the 20th of August. So they will go through the normal hearings process and through submissions, of course. But essentially, what's shown in red there is a high-level overview of where those qualifying matters essentially exist in the urban area and the Plan Change 9 extent. So through this plan change, we've also had the ability to include additional supporting changes. One of the key things that we've been working through with councillors too, through the workshops, and through with iwi and hapu, is obviously our papakāinga provisions, noting that they're currently, they're not seen as fit for purpose at the moment, and there was a call from iwi and hapu and the like, that we need to review our current provisions, and we've done that through this process. We've had various key meetings and key focus groups with those involved in that space, and we've gone with at least at this first stage, we've gone with what we can get essentially quick wins on the board, and that's removing barriers like the requirement for papakāinga to be adjacent to marae, and allowing greater density for papakāinga in the rural zones, and also acknowledging that papakāinga, it's hard to define and means something different to each iwi and hapu group, and we acknowledge though that papakāinga isn't just housing, and it can include all those ancillary and accessory activities that come along with that communal living, the papakāinga way, essentially. So we've acknowledged that as part of this plan change also. Other things that we've also considered, we've obviously got amendments to our financial contributions provisions, and that's basically allowing us to be giving council the ability to take a financial contribution on things that would now be considered a permitted activity like the additional housing of 3 or more on one site. And also we've amended the percentage of FC that would be taken in most cases, and that has seen a reduction in the level of reserve contribution that we will be seeking through the plan change. And you would have seen in the paper that we circulated as part of the agenda, we are seeking through the Environment Court immediate legal effect for those FC provisions. So they will have effect, if not by the 20th, fairly soon after the 20th of August. We've also reviewed our transport provisions, noting obviously with the MDRS coming into play in the urban area, there's obviously going to be a greater level of development provided for, and we just wanted to make sure that our transport provisions, things like number of houses, access of a private access way, are they fit for purpose as well, and will they help us deliver the level of housing that we need when these provisions come into play. So those are just a snapshot of the supporting changes that we've made as part of this plan change. In terms of a high level, I guess, timeline from here on in, obviously we're looking to notify the plan change as prescribed in the legislation by the 20th of August, and we've extended the submission period out to 2 months. So that submission period will run from August through to October 2022. Indicatively looking to hold hearings in August of 2023 next year. And obviously through the order in council, the government has given us until March 2024 to notify our final decisions on that plan change. So that is our deadline, but obviously between now and that March date, there's a lot of work that will need to be done. So we acknowledge that as well. Do you want to talk to the next steps?
Yeah, just briefly in terms of these are immediate next steps. So obviously today, getting your approval on the plan change. We then work at speed to prepare for notification, and we'll be looking at doing a mail out on the 19th of August, and public notification would obviously happen on the 20th of August. I think quite importantly at the moment, we're working with Nicoletta and the comms team to really ensure that we've got an easy, accessible, I suppose, website in terms of information around the plan change, and we're getting that content ready. And MFE is providing support with respect to a Friends of Submitter program, which is essentially support in terms of providing free support for anyone who needs assistance in writing submissions. And then I think quite importantly from our side, things don't stop now. We certainly engage both internally to make sure everyone's up to speed with the plan change. And obviously the front desk and obviously support services are ready to respond to significant inquiries. But I think equally externally, we'll be going back to our key stakeholder groups just to round out essentially what we've presented to yourselves and inform them about the submission process so that we can get well-informed submissions coming through. And obviously quite important is the appointment of commissioners, which we'll be dealing with as a separate item today. That's it from us.
We'll open now for any questions. Councillor Rokawate.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. March 2024, is that correct? Yes. So what does that mean for anybody that might be looking to do something at this point in time, progress their plans further, or come to you? Do they have to? Yes. What's that going to look like for them?
I think what you're seeing here is just that for some of these provisions, they go through the normal plan change timeframe, which a fast plan change is 3 years. But of course we signed up to the medium density residential standards, which give immediate legal effect. So for those areas, and I think it was the yellow and the orange, the MDRS, those medium density residential standards, have immediate legal effect. So that's the fast track piece. except, of course, where you saw that subsequent slide which showed some of those qualifying matters. So the red pieces create the exclusion. So everywhere else, so we're sort of talking about 80% of the urban area has now got an opportunity to see development move more quickly, straight through a more empowering approach from avoiding resource consents and going straight to a building consents. Those other provisions will go through a normal process of hearings right through to adoption in March 2024.
Right, we've now got Councillor Maxwell, then Kumar, then Kai Fong, and McPherson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And first of all, to Damon and Simon, JP, hats off to the amount of mahi and work that's been done already. I attended a few of the workshops and the iwi community groups that have, and also received letters, especially around the residential 3 zone. I'm pleased that you've been able to incorporate in there the removing of the requirement that
Have you got a question?
Yep, I have, right at the very end. Yeah, it needs to locate on land that adjoins or is adjacent to a marae. Now for the question. I'll leave. I think I meant to say at the beginning, Madam Mayor, that I had a comment and a question.
Oh, you haven't put the question yet.
No,
all right. Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Damon, for your report, JP and Simon. Just so in one word, is this removing the bottleneck on policies that we've currently got?
Yes.
Councillor Kai Fong.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered, JP, if you could just expand for the public, because we had the Development Contributions Forum when we were talking about financial contributions, and so this policy will actually reduce the financial contributions for reserves, but it will also enable the contributions to be spent elsewhere than in the new subdivision, and just the clarity around how the reduction of the percentage of the financial contributions will contribute to encourage efficient land use.
Councillors, we're through another process we've been talking to you about. We've got a lot of reserves, and a lot of our reserves represent quantity over quality. So one of the changes that we've put through in this financial contributions for this district plan is to really emphasise the fact that we can take a set value of land, so the percentage of land value, or cash for improvements on reserves or into other parts of the wider reserve network. Clearly, when you look at a subdivision, the reserve contributions may not necessarily be used in that reserve. They may also go to contribute towards cycle paths, other infrastructure, sports fields, so other parts of our reserve network that there is a demand on. So I think one of the things that we've talked about is we're reducing what had been a 5% reserve contribution of land to now 3.5% of land or cash equivalents for the development, but equally it's also the minor residential units. So we've talked about encouraging a second dwelling on a section or some other sort of higher density that would reduce now to 1%. So we've given a lot more variety to the kind of contributions, recognising different levels of demand from some of those infill and different uses.
Councillor McPherson.
Thank you. I had 2 questions. The first has just been answered. But first of all, gentlemen, thanks a million. A lot of hard work, much appreciated. The question is, how do we register interest in having a targeted information session for our stakeholder group?
Just dropping me or any one of the team members an email, and we can certainly give some information out to groups.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you. Team, I'm just having a look at the map on Stella here of the qualifying matters. Some of those blobs are a little bit indistinct and minute. How does one, when we notify the public, because I would imagine that'll be where a number of challenges will come from if someone's affected by a qualifying matter or not, how does one get clarity around where they are and where they're sited?
Thanks, Councillor. Yes, we are developing with our GIS team, obviously to refine these maps and to make a layer of this kind available through the GIS, where it will be a lot easier for an individual property owner to locate their site and to see whether a qualified matter is within their property. So we acknowledge that it's hard to see at that scale, and we're working through that at the moment.
So is that a sort of Google capacity?
It'll be through our Guides of View, our Guides of View online viewer, and that will be ready for notification on the 20th.
Just adding to it, probably, councillors, and some of you will no doubt see your eyes attracted to the biggest, reddest blobs. Obviously, you see there some of them. If I start on my furthest right, Ngāpuna is listed there, so obviously one of the villages is then therefore removed. Ohini Mutu, but wider than Ohini Mutu, is also starting to pick up some of the issues we've raised around the flood modelling. So that flood modelling starts to back up through that Utahina catchment into the Whakatau block. So that is some of the challenges that Regan spoke to you about this morning, and why we need to really start focusing on that design work to start reducing some of those flood risks in some of these urban areas of the city. So a really important part of this exercise. Probably the other one in the far right, and I'll just look to my right to confirm it, is if you start going up into the Wharanui area, for example, you've started to hit the obstacle limitation sphere, which is the airport trajectory. So there's a height limit already imposed on that. So as a consequence of that height limit, you can't automatically impose the medium density residential standards, because being enabled to go to 3 stories protrudes up above that height limit. So that's some of the factors that start being considered across those maps. So those are probably the largest 3 impactors there on that qualifying matters.
And the last thing to mention is that those red areas are not complete carve-outs from development. Obviously, development can happen, but not to the full extent of the MDRS. And then even then, within those areas, we just need to look a lot closer. So we still obviously require people to step through the process of understanding the site level constraints. So it mustn't be interpreted as, complete carve-out, no-go areas. It's development with limitations and some no-go areas.
Could I just ask a question, JP, going back to, I think it was about your second slide, where you talked about the number of houses needed. There's some conjecture that this is a figure plucked out of anywhere. Could you just clarify what was required for the place-based assessment?
Your Worship, it's good that you've raised that. See, one of the things is that we're complying with our requirements under the National Policy Statement on Urban Development as a Tier 2 council. So there were some very specific requirements that we needed to undertake, and a timetable for us to undertake the work of a housing and business assessment. And that was required to be in place by October of last year. So that was undertaken in a very specific methodology, and as a consequence of that review report, which had a set date and a set methodology, we had to identify a housing shortfall, of which we had to notify the Ministry for the Environment, and we also had to insert into our district plan what is called the housing bottom lines. So this is how many homes we need to see zoned for and enabled through our district plan. So when you see the normal cycle timing of a district plan or a district plan change of 3+ years, you start to realise that you have to start anticipating and planning the potential for far in excess. So this is us starting to plan out towards 2050. If growth doesn't occur at the speed it is projected to, then it doesn't. And we haven't had to invest in the infrastructure. But we have the zone enablement to respond to growth. And that's the critical piece. So we can't take a short-term view. We must take a 10 and 30-year view, because it takes so long for the planning frameworks to respond and for the infrastructure planning and enablement to be in place. So that has been our challenge for the growth over the last 7 years, is the speed on which it takes to change a district plan. So that's why we had volunteered to be part of the medium density residential standards, because we'd already run crashingly into an acute housing needs and that's why we qualified to be included with the Tier 1 councils. So that longer term cycle, you have to look through the current issues of the unpredicted actions in the Ukraine or global supplies of jib. We actually have to start planning for far in excess of that time horizon. There's another stipulated date when we'll do a review of the HBA again, which again gives us the chance to say, have we done enough and do we need to look at some more zoning? But this is that first critical step in making sure we get out of being reactive and behind demand and actually start to be ahead of it.
Councillor Kofon.
Thank you, Chief. I just had one other question before, which was just around the site coverage, and obviously one of the concerns that the community may have around the plan is that there's now no requirement for on-site parking. So communities may be concerned that there will be a lot of congestion on the streets, and I noticed that in some of the other documents, numerous documents that we were given with track changes, is that going forward there would also be less parking requirements required for even commercial.
I think that was one of the early requirements under the National Policy Statement and had already been enacted before we got into this process. So you're right, it's really much leaving it to the market now to determine the value of parking on either commercial or residential sites.
Thank you, JP. I think it's also good for the community to know that it's actually something that's out of Council's hands, that this is actually part of a policy plan change to enable more efficient use of the land, and not for car parking but for housing.
Councillor Maxwell.
He's
assured me it's a
yep,
question.
got my question lined up now. The main reason is it came up regarding the unique villages of Whakarewarewa or Hinemutu and that. So, and you don't have to be adjacent to it now. Will that mean anywhere within that village which we look upon as part of the marae and everything, they'll qualify? They'll have no impediments against some of the smaller homes or things that might be near?
So through engagement, we heard quite strongly from the villagers that they didn't want to be included in the MDRs. So they've essentially been, they're a qualifying matter. So we haven't included Ngāpuna or Nimutu or Whakarewarewa as adopting those MDRs, those medium density standards. The Papakāinga rules, which basically Papakāinga, they relate to the entire urban area and also the rural area. So we've made it more enabling within the entire district, essentially. So not just through the villages themselves, but any Māori-owned land or land administered by the Māori Land Court can essentially better enable Papakāinga through these provisions.
Thank you. There don't appear to be any more questions.
I was just going to add on to Simon's comments, if that's all right. I think just in relation to the cultural villages, their provisions were already fairly permissive. So I think the issue is that it wasn't going to add significantly more to the cultural villages, and so I think from a development potential as well, it's not so significant in terms of development potential lost through that process. But also I think the cultural villages feel more comfortable that their cultural values won't be affected through enacting these MDRS provisions.
Thank you. So I am going to ask for a mover and a seconder to the motions. I think I'll take them as 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Moved, Councillor Donaldson, seconded Councillor Kumar. Right, now we open for any discussion. No questions. Questions will be ruled out. Councillor Donaldson is the mover.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I think this is extremely timely and incredibly exciting for our district. I did notice there the comment on the PowerPoint with the growth projections that there's demand for an increasing number of smaller dwellings. I'm also hearing a lot of people I've had this discussion with incredibly excited about the opportunity of intergenerational living on existing sites, so whether they can the generation after me who have now suddenly becoming grandparents themselves want to bring whānau to live on and extend their existing dwelling, and the new building limitations will enable them to do that. So I think this is great to see this happening with urgency, and so I look forward to it getting good support from colleagues. Thank you.
Councillor Rotorua Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do support this this resolution. It will change the landscape for housing in the future for our city, and it is about the future. So it's future focused, and it's us trying to really plan for the future, because what our city will look like in 15, 30 years' time, the planning really should start now. And this I see as enabling that. So certainly I would support it.
Nobody else wish to speak? Councillor Kofon.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I support the resolution that's up there. I was involved in part of this, so I know of the huge amount of work that's gone in, but also just wanted to use this opportunity to thank the public, because we had a huge amount of community engagement. We had a number of schools that came in, and when we're talking about planning for the future, then we need to ensure that our youth and our rangatahi are actually involved in that process. So they were very engaged in working out what our city should look like in the future. We also had a lot of consultants and developers that came in and gave us the benefit of their knowledge. And also a large number of iwi groups came in too, and I know that they have aspirations for their land, so I think that this will give them the comfort and the inspiration to actually get on and do some papakainga housing. So I'm very supportive of this as just another part of our toolkit in terms of just trying to get on with building more housing, because we keep saying that we need to address the housing issue, and we just need to use as many tools and things that we can, and this is a great one, I think. So thanks to the team for all the work that you've done and getting all of the work done.
Thank you. And do I have anyone? We've had 3 in favour. Anyone speaking against the motion? Taken as one? No? Well, I'd like to close by saying thank you, and thank you to the councillors that did attend the workshops too, because you've got very close to this issue, and understanding the urgency and the pace that we need. Those that have been on council for longer than me know how long it takes to get a plan change through. It's such a prosaic process. This is relatively fast, and you don't often think so when you think of the steps. I'm also very pleased to see and hear the design guide. I remember at the Select Committee when we submitted, that was something very important that we wanted to make sure that this intensification will reflect our district. And that was an important part of the intensification that we did lobby for, and I'm so glad that that's here. I'm also pleased to see the papakainga potential here, and I think you said it all, Councillor Rotorua Lakes. It is going to change the look and feel of these areas, and we've been looking at barren land for a while, and it'll be wonderful to see who's going to be the early movers once you get this through. To see what the landscape will begin to look like. It was my dream that we'd get inner city living underway. This is the start, plus the other moves with Rotorua, which is great. And I really look forward to this moving at the same pace. But I am aware for planners how much work this has been to put you through, along with the RMA reforms going on. You've worked incredibly hard. I thank you for that. This is really giving attention to the pace that we need in order to house our people decently, and I think it's nice that it's called housing for everyone. Thank you. So I'm happy to support. So I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour? 2, 3, 4 and 5. Please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Carried unanimously. That's wonderful. Well done. We now move... It is great. We now move to a resolution to go on public excluded. There's one item in public excluded, and that's to request and approve the hearing commissioners and delegate authority to appoint hearing commissioners for Plan Change 9 housing for everyone. The reason why is to protect those persons' privacy. Do I have a mover and a seconder that council move into public excluded? Moved Councillor Kaifong, seconded Councillor Maxwell. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary?